Hi, welcome to the 700 Club. We're so glad you're with us. The United States is closing in on a deal with Iran over its nuclear program. Now the U.S. and the European Union are awaiting Iran's response, while Israel stands in very strong opposition to the agreement.
Well, the Israeli prime minister has denounced it as a bad deal that will give Iran over $100 billion a year to spread terror around the globe. Chris Mitchell brings us the latest.
Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid is still urging the U.S. and other nations to stay away from what he calls a bad deal.
It would give Iran $100 billion a year. This money will not build schools or hospitals. This is $100 billion a year that will be used to undermine stability in the Middle East and spread terror around the globe.
His remarks to foreign journalists came as both sides reported progress in the talks.
In our eyes, it does not meet the standards set by President Biden himself, preventing Iran from becoming a nuclear state.
Former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, calls it a shameful moment.
When President Biden was elected, he said clearly that he will make sure that the new agreement will be stronger and longer. What we are seeing today is a weaker and shorter agreement that will actually allow Iran to continue with their nuclear ambitions. It will be dangerous for Israel and for the region.
The U.S. and other world powers first signed a nuclear deal with Iran in 2015. 3 years later, then President Trump withdrew. Since then, Iran has openly broken the terms. 16 months ago, the EU began trying to revive the agreement.
They want to sign the agreement and to say we finished with that. But that's not the case. That's why together with our allies in the region, we will have to stand strong against Iran and prepare ourselves for every option.
Reserve Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser says Russia, China, and Iran would benefit from such an agreement.
From a global point of view, this is a very dangerous development because it means that all the three main powers that want to change the global order are making progress in their efforts because they understand that there is an American weakness.
Danon feels a deal would put Israel in a challenging position and believes the U.S. is taking advantage of Israel's political situation. With upcoming elections and what Danon calls an inexperienced leader, he believes the next government would need to do three things.
First is to isolate Iran. Second is to call for more sanctions. And third is to build our military capability. So if we will have to take care of this threat ourselves, we will have the means to do it.
Despite the nation's political differences, Danon maintains that when it comes to Iran, Israel will be united. Andrew?
Chris, appreciate you being with us. Talk about the concerns about the sanctions relief and the reported billions Iran would receive after this deal.
Well, Andrew, it's not only $100 billion now, but there's estimated by 2030 there'll be $1 trillion given to Iran. Now, the main concern people have is what this is going to do is fuel the many Iranian proxies throughout the region. That includes Hezbollah in Lebanon. That includes the Houthis in Hezbollah in Lebanon, I should say, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq, and also Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Gaza and the West Bank. And even now, Andrew, right now, some of these proxies are preparing to actually accelerate their attempts to destroy the Jewish state, which is the stated goal of not only Iran, but many of these proxies throughout the region.
All right, Chris, how about the Abraham Accords? They're nearly 2 years old. Talk about the impact a revived nuclear deal has on them.
Well, it's going to have a big impact. Right now, Andrew, what we're seeing is many of these Sunni nations like the UAE, Bahrain, even Saudi Arabia, that had been, not Saudi Arabia being part of the Abraham Accords, but many of these other nations are turning away from Israel and turning towards Iran. We were in the Gulf states and met with many leaders just a couple of months ago, and they were saying that Iran is the #1 threat. In fact, one leader said the three main threats that they face were Iran, Iran, and Iran. They're only 100 miles across the Gulf, and they see that as maybe the first step that Iran would attack. We were there in 2019 when Iran attacked Saudi Arabia, and also the Houthis have been attacking the UAE right now. So it really puts the pressure on these nations to hedge their bets and go towards Iran and away from Israel and the Abraham Accords. It really threatens these historic agreements.
So regarding Israel, does it put more pressure on Israel to attack Iran?
Very much so. And they have said that they're not party to this agreement. They have said that they will do whatever it takes to defend the Jewish state. And there's one thing that I think people need to understand, Andrew, and it's called the Begin Doctrine. Former Prime Minister Menachem Begin said they will not allow Iran or any of the neighbors of Israel to get a weapon of mass destruction. And I think that he did that in 1981 when he attacked the Iraqi nuclear reactor. Ehud Olmert did that in 2007. We'll see what Israel will do in 2022 or 2023 to prevent any neighbor like Iran getting a nuclear program, nuclear weapon, or a weapon of mass destruction. And it really behooves people to be praying right now for the peace of Jerusalem.
Yeah, Chris, real quick, I know you can't speak for the administration, but how does this deal possibly benefit the United States?
Well, you know, Andrew, what I think it does is two main ways to deal with enemies. So the Biden administration is appeasing Iran. The Trump administration confronted Iran with its maximum pressure campaign. And, you know, Winston Churchill said an appeaser is someone that feeds a crocodile hoping they will eat them last. I think right now we're seeing appeasement in action with potentially disastrous consequences.
All right, two very different approaches. Chris, thank you so much for being with us today. In other news, $500 billion over 10 years. That's how much President Biden's student loan cancellation could cost American taxpayers. Ephraim Graham has that story and much more from the CBN newsroom. Ephraim?
Andrew, Wednesday, the president announced the government will cancel student loan debt for millions of Americans. Critics say the plan is unfair and will increase inflation. George Thomas has more.
Tai Kiatatikom, who studies law at Ohio State University, is among millions of borrowers who will benefit from the loan forgiveness program.
It's not life-changing and it's not world-changing, but I'll take it.
Under the president's plan, the government will cancel $10,000 for borrowers making less than $125,000 a year and $20,000 for those who received Pell Grants.
All this means people can finally crawl out from under that mountain of debt, to get on top of their rent and their utilities, to finally think about buying a home or starting a family or starting a business.
Kiatatikom, who will be over $100,000 in debt by the time he graduates, says he'll take whatever help he can.
I mean, $10K off, it's not changing anything dramatically about my life situation, but it's going to be, it represents another extra month, maybe year, however long of freedom that I get to enjoy, financial freedom that I get to enjoy post-graduation.
Critics of the president's plan came out swinging.
Of all the dumb things Joe Biden has done, this may be the dumbest yet.
Tom Cotton of Arkansas calling it a bailout paid for by the American taxpayer.
Just think about how unfair this is for all the Americans who are harmed by this, who are now on the hook for hundreds of billions of dollars of other people's loans.
Jason Furman, former top economist for President Barack Obama, tweeting, pouring roughly $500 billion of gasoline on the inflationary fire that is already burning is reckless. And then there's the cost of the plan.
How are we going to effectively pay for this? I think in terms of the inflation where we're at now, it is only likely to increase.
One nonpartisan group predicts the president's plan could cost American taxpayers $500 billion over the next 10 years. And because he used executive action rather than legislation, legal challenges to his loan forgiveness plan are expected. George Thomas, CBN News.
The Biden administration also taking action to protect the children of immigrants who came to the United States illegally. The DACA policy allows hundreds of thousands of dreamers to live and work in the U.S., but it's faced court challenges. The Department of Homeland Security now turning DACA into a federal regulation to shield it from more legal action. The change is to take effect October 31st. As thousands of migrants continue to breach the southern border every month, the governors of Texas and Arizona are busing many to New York City and Washington, D.C. As CBN's Tara Mershner reports, they're challenging these sanctuary cities to live up to their names.
Mayors in both cities complain the busloads of some 8,000 migrants into New York and here in D.C. strain resources. The governors counter that Texas, Arizona, and other border states need relief as migrants constantly flood their communities, an estimated 2 million plus this year. Problems caused by record levels of illegal immigration now hitting home far from the southern border. As one bus after another pulls into New York's Port Authority, the Big Apple is searching for space.
We've opened 13 hotels to increase our capacity, and we're looking at every single option that we have.
With the school year starting, city officials are also integrating migrant children into the public school system.
We're showing these families that they are not in this alone, and we're making sure that our schools are ready to do the same.
Over the last few months, thousands of migrants have also been offered free rides from Texas to the nation's capital, courtesy of Arizona Governor Doug Ducey and Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
Before we began busing illegal immigrants, it was just Texas and Arizona that bore the brunt of all of the chaos and all the problems that come with it.
Migrants are overwhelming nonprofits and charities. This busload from Arizona arriving at a church near Capitol Hill, greeted by workers from an international relief agency.
We're asking the governor to please stop and let all of us work together to figure out how we can best provide the assistance that these human beings need.
For the second time, the Biden administration has denied D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser's plea for help, saying it could not fulfill the request. In Washington, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
And Andrew, back to you.
And Tara, who's kept us up to date on this situation for many months. You know, it's clear the states are going to have to deal with this until the federal government does. We've got governors, we've got mayors, ministry leaders, medical professionals trying to handle this situation. And until the political blowback really comes back to the current administration, it's going to continue to be up to the states.